The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dust-covered streets of Willow Creek as Penelope Winters stumbled into town, her face a map of purple bruises that told a story no one wanted to hear. It was 1878, and the small Montana settlement had seen its share of hardship, but the young schoolteacher's battered appearance caused whispers to ripple through the townsfolk like prairie fire. Penelope had arrived in Willow Creek just 3 months prior, hired to teach at the newly established schoolhouse. With her chestnut hair and bright eyes, she had caught the attention of many, including Gerald Blackstone, the town's wealthiest businessman. Their courtship had been swift, and their engagement announced to much fanfare. But behind closed doors, Gerald was not the gentleman he portrayed to the public. As she limped toward the sheriff's office, Penelope could feel the stares burning into her back. Her once white blouse was stained with dirt and tears, and her skirts were torn at the hem. The pain in her ribs made each breath a struggle, but she was determined. This would be the 3rd time she'd sought help, and she prayed it wouldn't be another exercise in futility. Sheriff Thomas Hanson looked up from his desk when the bell above the door jingled. His expression shifted from surprise to discomfort when he recognized his visitor. "Miss Winters," he said, standing awkwardly, "what brings you by today?" "I need to report an assault," Penelope said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Gerald, Mr. Blackstone, he did this to me." The sheriff's eyes darted away from her battered face. "Now, Miss Winters, that's a mighty serious accusation against a respected man." "I'm well aware of the seriousness, Sheriff. That's why I'm here." Penelope pulled back her sleeve to reveal finger-shaped bruises circling her wrist. "This is not the first time," Sheriff Hanson sighed, taking off his hat and running fingers through thinning hair. "Miss Winters, I don't mean to suggest you're being untruthful, but, well, Mr. Blackstone is an important man in this town. He's building the new church, funds half the businesses here. So his position allows him to beat a woman without consequence?" Penelope asked, her voice rising slightly. "Of course not, but—" The sheriff cleared his throat. "Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Arguments between engaged couples can get heated. Words can be misconstrued. There was no misunderstanding when his fist connected with my face," Penelope interrupted, anger momentarily overtaking her fear. The sheriff's expression hardened. "Miss Winters, I suggest you go home and rest. Consider that perhaps you provoked Mr. Blackstone in some way. A man doesn't just strike a woman without cause." Penelope stared at him in disbelief. "Without cause? What possible cause could justify this?" She gestured to her swollen eye. "I've said my piece. Now I have work to attend to." The sheriff turned his back to her, effectively dismissing her concerns once again. With nowhere else to turn, Penelope left the sheriff's office, the bell jingling mockingly behind her. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains, and the evening chill cut through her thin clothing. She had no desire to return to the small room she rented from Mrs. Holloway, knowing Gerald might be waiting for her there. Instead, she found herself wandering toward the edge of town, where the saloon's raucous laughter and piano music spilled into the evening air. The Rusty Nail was not a place for respectable women, but Penelope had stopped caring about respectability the moment Gerald's hand had first struck her face. Just as she approached the hitching post outside the saloon, the batwing doors swung open. A tall figure emerged, silhouetted against the golden light from within. As he stepped into the fading daylight, Penelope saw a man unlike any she'd encountered in Willow Creek. He wore the dust of long trails on his clothes, a dark shirt, leather vest, and denim pants tucked into worn boots. A revolver hung low on his hip, and his face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. What struck her most was the way he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced danger and lived to tell the tale. Xander Lockhart had ridden into Willow Creek that morning, seeking nothing more than a meal, a drink, and perhaps information about cattle rustlers reported in the area. As a former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter, he rarely stayed in one place longer than necessary. But as his eyes fell upon the battered woman standing in the dying light, something inside him shifted. Their gazes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Xander took in her bruised face, the defensive way she held herself, the fear and determination warring in her eyes. He'd seen that look before on women who had suffered at the hands of men who were supposed to protect them. "Madam," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly from trail dust. "Are you all right?" Penelope almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "Do I look all right to you, sir?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, madam, you surely do not." He stepped closer, moving with deliberate slowness as if approaching a skittish horse. "Those bruises tell a story I've heard before." "Then you'd be the first in this town to listen," Penelope replied bitterly. Xander glanced around, noting how the few people on the street averted their eyes as they passed. "Folks have a way of not seeing what's inconvenient," he said. "I'm not from around these parts, so my vision's clearer than most." Penelope studied him, weighing whether this stranger could be trusted. Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. "The sheriff won't help me. No one will stand against Gerald Blackstone." "Blackstone," Xander repeated, committing the name to memory. "He the one who did that to your face?" Penelope nodded. "And the sheriff turned you away 3 times now," she confirmed. "Says I must have provoked him. Says Gerald's too important to the town." Xander's jaw tightened. "Some men don't deserve the air they breathe." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Xander Lockhart, madam, former Texas Ranger. Penelope Winters, I teach at the school." "Miss Winters, I don't mean to presume, but it looks like you could use a safe place to rest and perhaps some medical attention." Penelope hesitated. "I can't go back to my boarding house. He knows where I stay. There's a doctor in town, Dr. Miller, but he's Gerald's friend. Last time he told everyone I fell down the stairs." Xander considered this. "I've some skill with basic doctoring. Trail life teaches a man to patch himself up or die trying." He gestured to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding tethered nearby. "I've made camp just outside town. It's not much, but it's safe." Under normal circumstances, Penelope would never consider following a strange man to his camp. But these were not normal circumstances, and her instincts told her this weathered cowboy posed less danger than returning to town. "I would be grateful for your help, Mr. Lockhart." Xander helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her with respectful distance between them. As they rode away from Willow Creek, Penelope felt both terror and relief. She was leaving everything she knew, placing her trust in a stranger, but for the first time in months she felt a flicker of hope. Xander's camp was simple but well-ordered, nestled in a small clearing near a stream. A canvas tent was pitched beneath a stand of cottonwoods, and a small fire burned low, coffee pot positioned at its edge. Once Penelope was seated on a bedroll by the fire. Xander retrieved a worn saddlebag and extracted a small tin of salve, clean cloths, and a flask of whiskey. "This will sting," he warned, dampening a cloth with whiskey. Penelope braced herself as he gently cleaned the cut above her eyebrow. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused and strong. As he worked, she found herself studying his face, the lines etched by sun and wind, the faint scar that ran along his jawline, the intensity in his gray-blue eyes. "You've done this before," she observed. "Patched up many a wound, though most were on men too stubborn to admit they needed help." He applied salve to her cut. "But I've tended to women like you before, too, women whose men thought their wedding vows included the right to raise their fists." "I'm not married to him," Penelope clarified, "though we were to be wed next month. I won't marry him, I'd rather die." Xander's hands stilled. "Don't talk like that, Miss Winters. It's the truth. I came west for a new beginning, to build something of my own. Instead, I found myself trapped by a man who sees me as property to control." Xander finished bandaging her cut and sat back. "How'd you end up engaged to such a man?" Penelope sighed. "When I first arrived, Gerald was charming, generous. The school needed books, and he provided them. The children needed warm clothing for winter, and he arranged it. He courted me with flowers and poetry, promises of a beautiful future. Her voice hardened. The first time he hit me was after I spoke to another man at church, just a simple conversation about the weather with the blacksmith. That night, Gerald accused me of flirting, of embarrassing him. And you stayed. He apologized, cried, brought me gifts. Said it would never happen again. Penelope looked into the fire. I believed him. The second time was worse, and each time after. She met Xander's gaze. I tried to leave. Twice. The first time he found me at the stagecoach office and created such a scene that the driver refused to let me board. The second time I made it as far as the next town before his men brought me back. Xander's expression darkened. His men? Gerald owns the largest cattle ranch in the territory. His foremen and hands are loyal to him, not to the law. And tonight was different. He accused me of stealing from him a family heirloom. When I denied it, She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to her ribs. I managed to get away when his housekeeper interrupted us. I went straight to the sheriff, but as usual, he did nothing. Xander stared into the fire, his jaw working as he processed her story. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Miss Winters, I want you to understand something. You tell me just once that you want to be free of this man, and I will act. No questions asked, no turning back. Penelope studied him, searching for signs of deception or hidden motive. Finding none, she drew a shaky breath. Mr. Lockhart, I want to be free of Gerald Blackstone. Xander nodded once, decisively. Then, from this moment, you are under my protection. But I need to know your wishes. Do you want to leave this territory, start fresh elsewhere? Or do you want to stay and see justice done? The question gave Penelope pause. She'd been so focused on escape that she hadn't considered what came after. I came to Willow Creek to teach. Those children need me, but as long as Gerald lives, I'll never be safe here. There are many kinds of justice, Miss Winters. Not all require a man's death. What do you propose? Xander poured them each a cup of coffee from the pot. First, we need evidence of his crime, something the sheriff can't ignore. Second, we need allies. Even the most powerful men have enemies. Third, we need to ensure your safety while we work. Penelope accepted the coffee, warming her hands around the tin cup. The evidence is on my body, yet the sheriff ignores it. As for enemies, Gerald is careful to maintain his reputation. Those who oppose him tend to lose their livelihoods or worse. Every man has secrets, Xander replied, and secrets are powerful weapons when wielded correctly. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. You'll stay here tonight. In the morning, we'll ride to Fort Laramie. I know the commander there, a fair man who won't be swayed by local politics. We'll get your statement properly documented, have a military doctor examine your injuries. Fort Laramie is 2 days' ride. We'll take it slow, mind your injuries, I've supplies enough. He glanced at her torn dress, though you might need some proper traveling clothes. Penelope thought of her few possessions back at the boarding house. Everything I own is in my room in town. We'll figure something out. Xander set aside his coffee. For now, you should rest. Take the tent, I'll sleep by the fire. Penelope wanted to protest, to insist she wasn't taking his shelter, but exhaustion washed over her in a sudden wave. The events of the day, the relief of finding an ally, and the physical toll of her injuries combined to leave her barely able to keep her eyes open. Thank you, Mr. Lockhart, she managed. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. No need for repayment, Miss Winters. Some things a man does because they need doing, not for reward. He helped her to her feet. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we begin setting things right. As Penelope settled into Xander's tent, wrapped in a clean blanket that smelled of wood smoke and horses, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months' safety. Outside, she could hear Xander moving quietly around the camp, checking his horse, adding wood to the fire. The rhythmic sounds lulled her toward sleep. For the first time since Gerald's true nature had revealed itself, Penelope allowed herself to imagine a future free from fear. She didn't know if such a future was possible, but with Xander Lockhart's unexpected arrival, she dared to hope. Dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in delicate shades of pink and gold. Penelope woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, momentarily disoriented by the canvas walls surrounding her. The events of the previous day came rushing back, and with them, a renewed sense of both dread and determination. When she emerged from the tent, she found Xander crouched by the fire, turning bacon in a small skillet. He looked up at her approach, his expression softening slightly. "Morning, Miss Winters. Sleep well." "Better than I expected," she admitted, self-consciously touching her bruised face. In the clear light of morning, she was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Xander seemed to read her thoughts. "There's water in the canteen if you want to freshen up. Streams just beyond those trees if you need more privacy." Grateful for his consideration, Penelope took the opportunity to wash her face and hands in the cool stream. The cold water was refreshing against her bruised skin, and she felt more human when she returned to the camp. Xander handed her a tin plate with bacon and a biscuit. "Not much of a breakfast, I'm afraid." "It's more than I expected," she said, accepting the plate. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Penelope spoke again. "Mr. Lockhart, I've been thinking about your plan to go to Fort Laramie. Having second thoughts." "No, but I'm concerned about what happens when Gerald discovers I'm gone. He won't simply let me leave." Xander nodded. "I considered that. Which is why we need to move quickly and leave no trail." "There's something else." Penelope hesitated. "The schoolchildren, they're expecting me today. If I don't show up, someone will come looking." "Is there anyone in town you trust, someone who could send word to the school?" Penelope thought for a moment. "Mrs. Miller, the doctor's wife, she's always been kind to me, though she can't openly defy her husband. Would she keep your confidence if you sent her a message?" "I believe she would." Xander considered this. "All right. We'll delay our departure long enough to get word to Mrs. Miller. I can ride into town, find her discreetly." "No," Penelope said firmly. "If you go asking for her, it will draw attention. I should go." "That's too dangerous. Blackstone could be watching for you, not if we're careful." Penelope leaned forward earnestly. "There's a back way into town through the creek bed. Mrs. Miller takes her washing to the creek every morning at sunrise. I could intercept her there, away from prying eyes." Xander frowned. "I don't like it." "Neither do I, but it's necessary. Those children depend on me. I can't just disappear without explanation." After further discussion, they formulated a plan. Xander would accompany Penelope to the creek, keeping watch while she spoke with Mrs. Miller. They would then circle around to the livery stable on the outskirts of town, where Xander would procure a horse for Penelope. By mid-morning, they would be on their way to Fort Laramie. As they rode double on Xander's horse toward town, Penelope was acutely aware of his solid presence behind her. Though they had met just hours before, she felt an inexplicable trust in this man. Perhaps it was the steady way he spoke, or how he had looked at her bruises with anger rather than discomfort. Whatever the reason, she found herself drawing strength from his proximity. The creek bed was shrouded in early morning mist when they arrived. Xander helped Penelope dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The touch was brief, but sent an unexpected warmth through her despite the morning chill. "I'll be watching from those trees," he said, nodding toward a small copse. "If anything seems wrong, I'll signal with a whistle 3 short bursts. You hear that, you run straight to me, understand?" Penelope nodded, grateful for his thoroughness. "You've got 15 minutes, Xander added. "Any longer and I'm coming to get you, plan or no plan." As predicted, Mrs. Miller appeared at the creek shortly after sunrise, carrying a basket of laundry. The older woman startled when Penelope emerged from behind a boulder. "Mercy, child, you nearly scared the life out of me." Her shock quickly turned to concern as she took in Penelope's bruised face. "Oh, Penelope, what's happened to you?" In hushed tones, Penelope explained that she was leaving town temporarily. She didn't share details of her destination or mention Xander, only asked Mrs. Miller to inform the school board that she had been called away on a family emergency. "It's that Blackstone man, isn't it?" Mrs. Miller asked shrewdly. I've seen how he watches you like a hawk eyeing a field mouse. Please, Mrs. Miller, the less you know, the safer you'll be. The older woman pressed a small parcel into Penelope's hands. Take these clean handkerchiefs and some of my lavender salve for those bruises. She hesitated. Are you safe, wherever you're going? Penelope thought of Xander waiting in the trees. Yes, I believe I am. Good. Then go with God, child. I'll tell them you had word your mother fell ill. With a quick embrace, they parted ways. Penelope hurried back to the trees where Xander waited, tension visible in the set of his shoulders until she appeared. All done. Yes, she'll tell them I had a family emergency. Their next stop was the livery stable, where Xander selected a sturdy mare for Penelope and paid the sleepy stable boy handsomely for both the horse and his discretion. By the time the sun had fully crested the mountains, they were riding east, away from Willow Creek and the shadow of Gerald Blackstone. They traveled at a steady pace, mindful of Penelope's injuries and the need to conserve the horse's strength for the long journey. Xander kept them off the main trails, following lesser-known paths through stands of pine and across shallow streams. He was clearly familiar with the territory, navigating with the confidence of a man who had spent years reading the land. As they rode, Penelope found herself studying Xander when he wasn't looking. There was a quiet strength about him, a self-assurance that didn't tip into arrogance. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. She wondered about his past, what had shaped him into the man who would so readily come to a stranger's aid. By midday, they stopped to rest in a sheltered valley beside a clear stream. As Xander tended to the horses, Penelope stretched her aching muscles. The long ride had aggravated her bruised ribs, but she was determined not to complain. How are you holding up? Xander asked, approaching with their canteens freshly filled from the stream. I'm fine, she said automatically, then corrected herself when his penetrating gaze made it clear he saw through the lie. My ribs hurt and I'm not used to so much riding, but I'll manage. Xander nodded, accepting her honest assessment. We'll take it slower this afternoon. He handed her a strip of jerky and some hardtack from his provisions. Not much of a lunch, I'm afraid. You keep apologizing for the food, Mr. Lockhart, but I'm grateful for every bite. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. My mother raised me to be a better host. Where is she now, your mother? Penelope asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more about her mysterious protector. Gone these past 5 years, consumption. His expression softened with memory. She was a good woman, too good for the hard life she led, and your father killed in the war. Confederate cavalry. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a statement of fact. I'm sorry for your losses, Penelope said softly. Xander shrugged. Life takes what it takes, no use dwelling on it. He glanced at her. What about your family, anyone who might worry about you? My parents died in a typhoid outbreak when I was 16. I lived with my aunt until I was old enough to attend normal school in St. Louis. When I finished my training, I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana Territory. She smiled faintly. I had such romantic notions about the West, wide open spaces, new beginnings, independence. And instead you found Gerald Blackstone. Not at first. For a while it was everything I'd imagined. The children are wonderful, eager to learn despite having so little. The community welcomed me. Her smile faded. Gerald was just part of that welcome at first, a benefactor to the school, nothing more. How did it change? Penelope sighed. Gradually, then suddenly. He began calling at my boarding house, bringing gifts I couldn't refuse without seeming ungrateful. He would appear wherever I went: church, the general store, school events. Always polite, always generous, but persistent. And no one thought that strange, they thought it flattering. The wealthiest man in the county courting the schoolteacher. It was like something from a novel. She shook her head. By the time I realized what was happening, the whole town expected us to marry. When he proposed at the Founders' Day picnic with everyone watching, how could I refuse? When did he first hit you? Xander asked quietly. 2 weeks after our engagement. I'd spent too long talking to the blacksmith's son about a book he'd borrowed. Gerald waited until we were alone, then accused me of making him look foolish, of flirting with a common laborer. She swallowed hard at the memory. He slapped me so hard I fell. Then he cried, begged forgiveness, swore it would never happen again. But it did. Yes, each time worse than the last, each time followed by gifts, tears, promises. She looked down at her hands. I should have been stronger, should have left after the first time. No, Xander said firmly, surprising her with his vehemence. Don't blame yourself for his actions. Men like Blackstone are skilled at breaking down a person's defenses, making them doubt themselves. The fact that you finally decided to leave shows your strength, not weakness. His words washed over her like a healing balm. For months, Penelope had castigated herself for not leaving sooner, for not seeing Gerald's true nature earlier. Hearing Xander absolve her of blame brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, hastily wiping away the moisture before it could fall. Xander looked uncomfortable with her emotion, clearing his throat and standing. "We should get moving. Still have a good few hours of daylight left." As they continued their journey, the sky clouded over, and by late afternoon, a light rain began to fall. Xander led them to an abandoned trapper's cabin he knew of, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by pines. The cabin was rustic but sound, offering welcome shelter from the increasingly heavy rain. While Xander saw to the horses, Penelope explored the single-room cabin. It contained a crude table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame with a straw-filled mattress that had seen better days. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a few basic utensils hung from pegs nearby. By the time Xander entered, shaking rain from his hat, Penelope had swept the worst of the dust from the floor and found a few pieces of kindling by the fireplace. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Xander commented, setting down his saddlebags. "It's dry and has a roof. That's luxury enough for me." Penelope watched as he expertly laid and lit a fire, the small flames casting flickering shadows around the cabin. As the rain intensified, drumming steadily on the roof, they shared a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and canned peaches Xander had in his provisions. The fire warmed the small space, and despite the circumstances, Penelope found herself relaxing in the cozy atmosphere. "You never told me how a Texas Ranger ended up in Montana," she said, breaking a comfortable silence. Xander poked at the fire before answering. "I'm not a ranger anymore, haven't been for 3 years. What happened?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I disagreed with certain methods my commanding officer employed. When I reported him, I discovered the higher-ups were no more interested in justice than he was." His voice held controlled anger. "I was given the choice to keep quiet or turn in my badge. I chose the badge. That must have been difficult. It was the only choice I could live with." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "A man has to answer to his own conscience at the end of the day, and now you're a bounty hunter, among other things." "I track men who need finding, some for the law, some for private citizens with legitimate grievances." "Is that what brought you to Willow Creek?" Xander nodded. "Cattle rustlers hitting ranches along the border. I was hired to investigate, see if I could identify the gang responsible." "Gerald's ranch hasn't been hit," Penelope said thoughtfully. "Every other major operation has complained of losses, but not the Blackstone spread." Xander's eyes sharpened with interest. "You certain of that?" "I heard Gerald boasting about it at church, how his men were too vigilant, his security too good for rustlers to dare target his herd." "Interesting." Xander's expression became contemplative. "Very interesting indeed. You think he might be involved with the rustling?" "It wouldn't be the first time a rancher stole from his neighbors to increase his own herd." Xander leaned back in his chair. "It's worth looking into. Might give us another angle if the assault charges aren't enough to bring him down." The conversation shifted to their plans for Fort Laramie. Xander estimated they would arrive by midday tomorrow if the weather cleared. Once there, he would introduce Penelope to Colonel Harrison, the fort commander, and Dr. Elizabeth Parker, the physician's wife who had medical training. A female doctor, Penelope asked, surprised. Not officially. The Army won't recognize her credentials, but she trained at a women's medical college back east. The colonel lets her treat civilian patients, especially women and children. Xander's expression softened slightly. She's good people, you'll be comfortable with her. As night deepened outside, the question of sleeping arrangements arose. The cabin offered only the single bed and the floor by the fire. You take the bed, Xander said firmly. I've slept on harder ground than this. Penelope wanted to protest, but knew from the set of his jaw that argument would be futile. Instead, she thanked him and settled onto the lumpy mattress, wrapping herself in the blanket he offered from his bedroll. From her position, she watched as Xander spread his coat by the fire and stretched out, using his saddle as a pillow. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the thoughtful set of his mouth. Something stirred within Penelope, an awareness that went beyond gratitude for his protection. She quickly closed her eyes against the unwelcome feelings. After her experience with Gerald, the last thing she needed was to develop an attachment to another man, especially one who would likely ride out of her life once justice was served. With that sobering thought, she forced herself to sleep. The rain continued through the night but had lightened to a fine mist by morning. After a quick breakfast, they resumed their journey toward Fort Laramie. The terrain became more rugged as they traveled, the path winding through pine-covered hills and across rocky plateaus. By midday, just as Xander had predicted, the fort came into view, an imposing collection of buildings surrounded by a high wall, the American flag snapping in the breeze above the main gate. As they approached, sentries hailed them. Xander identified himself, mentioning Colonel Harrison, and after a brief consultation, they were admitted. Penelope felt numerous eyes on her as they rode through the busy compound, curious glances at her bruised face quickly averted when they met her gaze. Xander led them to a tidy clapboard house set apart from the barracks. Before he could dismount, the door opened and a woman emerged. Dr. Elizabeth Parker was not what Penelope had expected, rather than the severe, mannish figure she had imagined. Dr. Parker was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair neatly pinned up. "Xander Lockhart," she said, her tone both pleased and exasperated. "It's been ages since you've darkened my door, and I suspect you've brought me work rather than a social call." "Guilty as charged, Lizzie." Xander helped Penelope dismount, his hands gentle on her waist. "This is Miss Penelope Winters. She needs your help, medical attention and documentation of her injuries." Dr. Parker's expression softened as she took in Penelope's battered face. "Of course." "Please come inside, Miss Winters." She shot Xander a look. "You can report to Harrison while I examine her. We don't need a man hovering about." Penelope felt a momentary panic at the thought of separation from Xander, her only ally in this strange place. He seemed to sense her discomfort. "Lizzie's the best doctor in 3 territories," he assured her. "And the colonel needs to hear what's happened. I'll be back before you know it." Reluctantly, Penelope followed Dr. Parker into the house while Xander led the horses toward the command building. Inside, the doctor's home was warm and welcoming, with medical texts sharing shelf space with novels and botanical drawings decorating the walls. "Let's get you comfortable," Dr. Parker said, leading Penelope to an examination room off the main living area. "Then you can tell me exactly what happened while I assess your injuries." Over the next hour, Dr. Parker gently examined Penelope, documenting each bruise and abrasion with clinical precision and compassionate care. She determined that Penelope had 2 cracked ribs and extensive bruising, but, thankfully, no internal bleeding. "You're fortunate," she said, applying a soothing salve to Penelope's bruised cheekbone. "These will heal with time and proper care. The ribs will be painful for several weeks, but as long as you don't exert yourself too strenuously, they should mend well." "Thank you, Dr. Parker." "Elizabeth, please, or Lizzie, though only Xander gets away with that regularly." She smiled warmly. "How did you come to be in his company?" He's not usually one to involve himself in domestic matters. Penelope explained their chance meeting and Xander's immediate offer of help. As she spoke, Elizabeth's expression grew thoughtful. That's not like him, she mused. Don't misunderstand, Xander's a good man with a strong sense of justice. But he typically keeps to himself, focuses on his bounties. Getting involved in a local dispute, especially against a powerful man, that's unexpected. I'm grateful he did, Penelope said quietly. No one else would help me. Elizabeth patted her hand. Well, you have help now. I've documented everything thoroughly. Between my medical report and Colonel Harrison's influence, we should be able to ensure this Blackstone faces consequences for his actions. A knock at the door interrupted them. Elizabeth opened it to reveal Xander standing with a tall, distinguished man in an army colonel's uniform. Miss Winters, the colonel said, stepping forward. I'm Colonel James Harrison. Lockhart has explained your situation. I want to assure you that you're safe here at Fort Laramie. Thank you, Colonel. I've taken the liberty of sending a telegram to the territorial governor, he continued. He and I served together during the war, and he takes a dim view of men who abuse women, with Dr. Parker's medical documentation and your sworn statement, we should be able to secure an arrest warrant for Blackstone. Hope surged in Penelope's chest. You believe me? Just like that, Colonel Harrison's expression softened. Miss Winters, those bruises speak for themselves. And while Lockhart may be many things, he's not a man given to exaggeration or flights of fancy. If he vouches for your character, that's good enough for me. The colonel arranged for Penelope to stay in guest quarters at the fort while they awaited the governor's response. Xander was assigned a bunk in the NCO quarters, though he spent most of his time either with Penelope or conferring with the colonel about the cattle rustling situation. 3 days passed in relative calm. Penelope's bruises began to fade from purple to yellowish green, and the constant fear that had been her companion for months gradually eased. Elizabeth visited daily, checking her injuries and providing welcome female companionship. On the 4th morning, Penelope was enjoying breakfast in the officers' mess when Xander and Colonel Harrison approached, their expressions grave. What's happened? She asked, setting down her fork. We've received news from Willow Creek, the colonel said carefully. It seems Mr. Blackstone has filed charges against you for theft of a family heirloom, a diamond brooch valued at over $500. The sheriff has issued a warrant for your arrest, Penelope gasped. That's absurd. I never took anything from him. We know, Xander said, his voice tight with anger. It's a transparent attempt to discredit you and justify his actions. There's more, Colonel Harrison added reluctantly. Blackstone is also spreading rumors that you've run off with a notorious outlaw, presumably referring to Lockhart here. He's painted a picture of you as an unstable, immoral woman who fabricated the assault allegations when caught stealing. Who would believe such nonsense? Penelope demanded, though she knew the answer. In a town where Gerald Blackstone's influence touched everything, his word would be accepted without question. Unfortunately, many in Willow Creek apparently do, the colonel confirmed. The governor's representative arrived there yesterday to investigate your allegations, only to be presented with multiple witnesses attesting to your unstable behavior and Blackstone's upstanding character. Penelope felt the room spin slightly. So it was all for nothing. He'll get away with it again. No, Xander said firmly, placing a hand on the table near hers, not touching but close enough to offer support. This changes our approach, not our goal. Colonel Harrison nodded. Lockhart's right. The governor's still reviewing the case, but we need to counter Blackstone's narrative with evidence of our own. What evidence? It's my word against his, and he has the entire town backing his version. Not the entire town, Xander said. Remember what you told me about the rustling. How Blackstone's ranch hasn't been hit. I've been making inquiries. 3 ranchers are willing to testify that they suspect Blackstone's involvement in the theft of their cattle. And I've received a telegram from an old colleague in Texas, the colonel added. It seems your Mr. Blackstone has a history there under a different name, James Gerald Black. He fled Texas in '73 after similar accusations from his first wife, who subsequently disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Hope rekindled in Penelope's chest. So we can prove he's not who he claims to be, if we can link Blackstone to Black conclusively, yes. The colonel looked troubled. But it won't be easy. The man's been careful to establish his identity here. We need physical evidence, Xander said. Something that ties him directly to either the rustling or his previous identity. Such evidence would be at his ranch, Penelope pointed out, or perhaps his office in town. Xander's eyes met hers, a silent understanding passing between them. Exactly. Which is why I'm riding back to Willow Creek tonight. No, Penelope exclaimed, it's too dangerous. If Gerald suspects you're investigating him, he won't see me coming, Xander assured her. I wasn't a ranger for nothing, Miss Winters. I know how to move unseen when necessary. Despite her protests, Xander's mind was made up. He would travel to Willow Creek under cover of darkness, search Blackstone's office and ranch for evidence, and return to the fort within 3 days. Colonel Harrison reluctantly approved the plan, providing Xander with official documentation identifying him as acting on behalf of the territorial authorities. That evening, Penelope found Xander at the stables, preparing his horse for the journey. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, giving the scene a melancholy aspect that matched her mood. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Xander continued checking his saddle straps. Yes, I do. Why, you barely know me. This isn't your fight. He paused, turning to face her. In the golden evening light, his features seemed softer, more open than usual. Some fights choose you, Miss Winters. The moment I saw your bruised face outside that saloon, this became my fight. But why? There must be countless women in similar situations across the territories. You can't save them all. No, he agreed, his voice low, but I can try to save you. The simple declaration stole Penelope's breath. For a moment neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. I lost someone once, Xander finally said, breaking the silence. My sister. Her husband was like your Blackstone, charming in public, a monster behind closed doors. By the time I discovered what was happening, it was too late. His jaw tightened. I won't be too late again. Penelope stepped closer, laying a gentle hand on his arm. I'm so sorry about your sister. But please don't risk yourself for me out of guilt or obligation. It's not just that. Xander covered her hand with his, the touch sending warmth through her despite the evening chill. In the few days I've known you, I've seen your courage, your resilience. You deserve justice, Penelope. And a chance at the life you came west to find. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made something shift inside her. Impulsively, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his weathered cheek. Come back safely, she whispered. Xander's eyes darkened with emotion. For a breathless moment, Penelope thought he might pull her closer, but instead he stepped back, maintaining a respectful distance. 3 days, he promised. If I'm not back by sunset on the 3rd day, tell Harrison to send men to Blackstone's ranch. With that, he mounted his horse and rode out of the fort, a solitary figure against the twilight sky. Penelope watched until he disappeared from view, her heart heavy with worry and something she wasn't ready to name. The next 2 days passed with excruciating slowness. Penelope tried to occupy herself by assisting Elizabeth with her patients and helping at the fort's small school. But her thoughts constantly returned to Xander, wondering if he was safe, if he had found the evidence they needed. On the morning of the 3rd day, an unexpected visitor arrived at Fort Laramie, Mrs. Miller from Willow Creek. The older woman was dusty from travel and clearly exhausted, but her eyes lit up when she saw Penelope. Thank heavens you're safe, child, she said, embracing Penelope carefully. I've been so worried. Mrs. Miller, what are you doing here? It's not safe for you. Nonsense. I'm too old to worry about what's safe. She pulled back, studying Penelope's healing bruises with satisfaction. You look better, still too thin, but better. Colonel Harrison provided Mrs. Miller with refreshments while she explained the reason for her journey. The situation in Willow Creek had deteriorated in Penelope's absence. Gerald Blackstone had become increasingly volatile, firing workers who expressed sympathy for Penelope, threatening the livelihood of anyone who questioned his version of events. "But that's not why I came," Mrs. Miller said, reaching into her handbag. "2 days ago, a man came to my back door after dark, a tall fellow with a weathered face and serious eyes." "Xander," Penelope breathed. Mrs. Miller nodded. "He didn't give his name, just asked if I was the lady from the creek who helped you. When I confirmed it, he gave me this." She handed Penelope a folded paper. "Said if anything happened to him, I should bring it to you at Fort Laramie immediately." With trembling fingers, Penelope unfolded the document. It was a bill of sale for cattle, showing the transfer of 20 head from the Cooper Ranch to Gerald Blackstone at a fraction of their market value. The date corresponded with a reported rustling incident at the Cooper spread. "There's more," Mrs. Miller added, producing a small leather-bound book. He found this hidden in a false bottom of Blackstone's desk. The book proved to be a personal journal belonging to James Gerald Black, detailing his flight from Texas after his wife became inconveniently suspicious about certain business dealings. The final entries described his plan to establish a new identity in Montana territory. Colonel Harrison examined the evidence with growing excitement. "This is exactly what we needed. The cattle receipt proves Blackstone's connection to the rustling, and the journal confirms his true identity." "But where is Xander now?" Penelope asked, worry clouding her relief. "Why would he send these with Mrs. Miller instead of bringing them himself?" Mrs. Miller's expression grew grave. "The night before last, there was a commotion at Blackstone's ranch. Gunshots were heard. The next morning, Blackstone claimed he'd caught a rustler trying to steal his horses. Said he shot the man, but the body disappeared." Penelope's blood ran cold. "No, I don't know if it was your friend," Mrs. Miller said gently. "But Blackstone has been acting strangely since drinking heavily, posting extra guards around his property. Something has him rattled." Colonel Harrison immediately organized a search party. 30 soldiers would ride for Willow Creek at first light, with orders to search for Xander and arrest Gerald Blackstone based on the evidence they now possessed. That night, Penelope barely slept. She alternated between fervent prayer for Xander's safety and grim preparation for the worst. By dawn, she was dressed and waiting in the fort's courtyard, determined to accompany the search party. "Absolutely not," Colonel Harrison said when he saw her. "It's too dangerous, Miss Winters. With all due respect, Colonel, Mr. Lockhart risked his life to help me. I won't sit safely behind these walls while he might be injured or—" She couldn't bring herself to complete the thought. "The lady has a point, James," Elizabeth said, joining them with her medical bag. "And you'll need a doctor if Lockhart's hurt. I'm coming too." Outnumbered, the colonel reluctantly agreed to let them both accompany the party, though he insisted they stay with the rear guard once they reached Willow Creek. The journey to Willow Creek was made at a punishing pace, the soldiers pushing their mounts to cover ground quickly. By mid-afternoon, they crested the final ridge overlooking the town. From their vantage point, they could see unusual activity around the sheriff's office. A crowd had gathered, and several horses were tethered outside. "Something's happened," Colonel Harrison murmured, raising his field glasses. After a moment, his expression changed to one of surprised relief. "Well, I'll be damned." He passed the glasses to Penelope. When she focused on the scene below, her heart leaped. There, standing on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, was Xander Lockhart. He was dusty and appeared to be favoring his left arm, but he was unmistakably alive. Beside him stood Sheriff Hanson, looking distinctly uncomfortable, and 2 other men wearing deputy badges from a neighboring county. The soldiers approached the town cautiously, unsure of the reception they would receive. As they rode down the main street, townsfolk stopped to stare, many backing away nervously at the sight of so many armed men. When they reached the sheriff's office, Xander stepped forward, a smile breaking across his usually stoic features when he spotted Penelope. "Miss Winters," he called, "you're a sight for sore eyes." Ignoring protocol and propriety, Penelope dismounted and rushed to him, stopping just short of an embrace as she remembered their audience. "We thought you were dead," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Nearly was," he admitted, gesturing to his bandaged arm. "Blackstone's a fair shot, but too fond of whiskey for his aim to be true." Colonel Harrison joined them, demanding an explanation. Xander obliged, describing how he had searched Blackstone's office and found the journal, then sent it with Mrs. Miller as insurance before investigating the ranch. He'd been discovered by Blackstone himself while examining records in the ranch office. "He shot me as I was leaving through the window," Xander explained. "I played dead until he approached, then disarmed him. We had a discussion about his treatment of Miss Winters and his cattle rustling operation." The careful way he said "discussion" suggested it had been considerably more heated than the word implied. "And where is Blackstone now?" the colonel asked. Sheriff Hansen stepped forward, looking like he'd swallowed something sour. "In my jail, Colonel, along with his foreman and 2 hands who were involved in the rustling." Penelope stared at the sheriff in disbelief. "You arrested him, after refusing to help me 3 times." Hansen had the grace to look ashamed. "Miss Winters, I've made a terrible mistake in how I handled your complaints. When Lockhart brought Blackstone in with evidence of the rustling and that journal showing his real identity, well, I couldn't ignore it any longer." "The sheriff sent for deputies from the next county," Xander added. "To ensure everything's handled properly, Blackstone's friends won't be able to influence the process." Over the next few hours, the full story emerged. After confronting Blackstone at the ranch, Xander had forced him to ride into town and surrender to the sheriff. Initially reluctant, Hansen had changed his tune when presented with irrefutable evidence of multiple crimes. The neighboring county's sheriff, who had lost cattle to the rustling operation, had eagerly sent deputies to assist. Word had spread quickly through Willow Creek. Many who had once supported Blackstone now distanced themselves, claiming they'd never truly trusted him. Others, particularly those who had witnessed Penelope's bruises and chosen to look away, were more genuinely contrite. By evening, a preliminary hearing had been arranged. The territorial judge would arrive within the week, and Blackstone would remain in custody until then. With the evidence compiled: Penelope's testimony, Dr. Parker's medical documentation, the rustling proof, and the journal confirming Blackstone's false identity conviction seemed certain. As darkness fell, Penelope found herself on the porch of Mrs. Miller's house, where she had been invited to stay. The older woman had tactfully retired early, leaving Penelope alone with her thoughts. She was standing there, watching stars appear in the vast Montana sky, when she heard footsteps on the path. Xander approached, his arm properly bandaged now, his face clean but still bearing the weariness of recent days. "How's the arm?" she asked as he joined her on the porch. "Dr. Parker says I'll live. Bullet just grazed me, though it bled impressively." He leaned against the railing, studying her face in the soft lamplight spilling from the window. "How are you holding up?" "I'm still processing everything," Penelope admitted. "It doesn't seem quite real that he's actually going to face justice." "Believe it. Blackstone or Black rather won't harm anyone else. The Texas authorities are particularly interested in questioning him about his first wife's disappearance." Penelope shuddered at the implication. "What happens now?" "You'll need to testify at the trial, but after that, your life is your own again." Xander's voice was gentle. "You can return to teaching if that's what you want." "It is," she said, then hesitated. "Though I'm not sure if I'll stay in Willow Creek. There are too many memories here now." Xander nodded, understanding. Colonel Harrison mentioned the Army's looking for a teacher at Fort Laramie, the previous ones moving east to be married. "That's a possibility," Penelope agreed. She gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "And what about you?" Where will you go when this is over? Xander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. I'm not sure, he finally said. I've been thinking it might be time to stop drifting, put down some roots. Hope fluttered in Penelope's chest, but she kept her voice steady. Any particular place in mind? His eyes met hers, warm with an emotion she was beginning to recognize. Thought I might see if Fort Laramie needs a man with my particular skills. The colonel mentioned they're short-handed when it comes to tracking deserters and investigating troubles with the local tribes. That sounds like a good opportunity, Penelope said carefully, not wanting to presume too much. Xander took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. There's something else keeping me interested in Fort Laramie. Oh, her voice came out slightly breathless, a schoolteacher. Brave, stubborn woman with the prettiest smile I've seen in all my travels. His hand came up to gently touch her cheek, where the bruises had faded to a pale yellow. If she'd be amenable, I'd like to court her properly. No rushing, no pressure, just two people getting to know each other better. Joy bubbled up inside Penelope, unexpected and sweet. I think she would be very amenable to that arrangement, Mr. Lockhart. Xander, he corrected softly. If we're to be courting, you should use my given name. Xander, she repeated, liking the feel of it on her tongue, and you should call me Penelope. His smile, rare and transformative, lit his weathered features. Penelope, he said, as if testing the sound of it. Then, with exquisite gentleness, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that held promise rather than demand, respect rather than possession. When they parted, Penelope felt as if something fundamental had shifted in her world. The fear that had been her constant companion for months had been replaced by something new, hope for a future she could shape on her own terms, with a man who saw her strength rather than sought to break it. It won't be easy, Xander cautioned. I've been on my own a long time, got some rough edges that need smoothing. And I have healing to do, Penelope acknowledged. But I think perhaps we could help each other with those things. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her fingers. I'd like that, Penelope. I'd like that very much. As they stood together in the quiet Montana night, Penelope realized that her journey west had finally brought her what she'd been seeking all along, not just independence, but the freedom to choose a life partner based on mutual respect and genuine caring. In Xander Lockhart, she had found not a savior, but an ally who believed her when no one else would, who acted when words alone weren't enough. And that, she thought as he drew her gently into his arms again, was the foundation on which true love could be built. 3 years later, Fort Laramie's schoolhouse bustled with activity as children prepared for the year-end exhibition. Penelope Lockhart moved among her students, offering guidance and encouragement as they practiced their recitations and displayed their academic work. Through the window, she caught sight of her husband approaching on horseback, returning from his latest assignment tracking renegade whiskey traders. Xander had proven invaluable to Colonel Harrison, his tracking skills and knowledge of the territory making him one of the fort's most respected civilian employees. As he dismounted, their 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, broke free from Elizabeth Parker's watchful eye and toddled toward her father. Xander's face transformed with joy as he swung the little girl into the air, her delighted giggles carrying across the parade ground. Penelope smiled, touching the simple gold band on her finger. Their courtship had progressed slowly, with respect for her past trauma. When Xander had proposed 6 months after Blackstone's conviction, he had done so with a promise that their home would always be a place of safety and mutual respect. They had married at Fort Laramie with Colonel Harrison officiating and Elizabeth serving as Penelope's attendant. Mrs. Miller had traveled from Willow Creek for the occasion, bringing news that the town was slowly healing from Blackstone's influence, with a new sheriff and more transparent governance. Life at the fort suited them both. Penelope found fulfillment in her teaching, while Xander's work allowed him to use his skills for justice rather than mere bounty hunting. When Sarah arrived, bringing new joy to their lives, they felt their family complete. As Penelope watched her husband carrying their daughter toward the schoolhouse, she reflected on the journey that had brought them together. From the darkest moments of her life had come the greatest happiness, a paradox that still amazed her. Xander reached the schoolhouse, setting Sarah down so she could run to her mother. As he followed, his eyes met Penelope's with the same warmth that had first given her courage to trust again. "Welcome home," she said, accepting his brief kiss. "Good to be home," he replied, his arms sliding comfortably around her waist as they watched their daughter explore the classroom displays. In that moment of simple domesticity, Penelope felt the full measure of their shared victory. Gerald Blackstone, James Black, was serving a life sentence for murder and multiple other crimes. His legacy of fear had been replaced by the loving family before her, built on a foundation of belief when no one else would listen, and action when mere words were not enough. And in that, Penelope had found not just safety, but the truest form of love, one that healed rather than harmed, that built rather than destroyed. One worth waiting for, worth fighting for. One that would last all the days of their lives.